Hello, how's it going everyone? So I am back with a interesting video. This is going to be sort of the journey that I went on and what kind of got me to the conclusion I'm at today. John's journey is pretty much right ahead of this, so I've been kind of working with John throughout this whole entire process, kind of seeing the earlier part of the learning curve and then the more complicated part of the learning curve when it comes to where we're at now. And then I'll add another box at the end that will kind of showcase where we're looking at more so now, because it's getting a lot more complicated. So anyways, typically when people start out is they're focused on ROAS or POAS, right? So we're looking at in-platform metrics, looking at Google ads, meta ads, those types of things. And the issue that is in this space is that, like I've said in many other videos, ROAS and POAS or anything in platform is not necessarily the way to measure, because you have cross-channel attribution issues and the data is not necessarily fully concise. It's more about click data. There's not really impression data that's being captured. Even though they say there is, it's not real data. And so it's more based on assumptions, and this doesn't actually give you the health of the business, because in a lot of cases you might have a really good ROAS, but you'll see terrible business results, and that obviously depends on the business model more so, but that typically is what tends to happen. And so people tend to scale what they think is looking better, but the reality is it's not actually impacting the business in the positive way, right? So Google ads looks amazing, 1000% ROAS. Meta looks terrible, 1x ROAS, let's say. Meta could be driving all the sales over to Google and vice versa, right? So we have to be more understanding than this. Now, typically what people then jump into is the next stage over here, where we're like, well, okay, I know this is a problem, and this is where I would say a lot of media buyers are in the space, is like, okay, I know this is a problem over here. I'm gonna see what third-party tool can help me solve this problem over here of cross-attribution, loss of attribution, impression data loss, all that, right? And so they go with these third-party tools and think that this will solve the problem, right? So they'll be using, and I'm just gonna call them all out, but Triple Whale, Northbeam, Hyros. I would say Wicked's above the rest, but in terms of what mainstream, I guess you can say, digital marketers do, is they typically use these tools. And the reason why they use these tools, like I was saying earlier, is to help solve the issue of attribution. But the reality is it doesn't necessarily solve the issue. Yes, it gets rid of some of the duplication going on, meaning that if Meta says it got a conversion and Google said it got a conversion, it will get rid of that and attribute it to the overall business health. But people use these tools as a way to look at specific channels and not necessarily the top line of the business. And so what I mean by that is that if they're looking at, let's say, Triple Whale, and they say, oh, Google's doing better than Northbeam, it says the NCAC's better, and on Facebook the NCAC is worse. Okay, I'm gonna scale up this channel on Triple Whale because it says that the data is a lot better, and so we're going to lean more into that. Whereas in the reality of it, we're not necessarily looking at clean data as well either. We're building algorithms on top of algorithms, right? So there's a lot of mess going on. There's not a lot of, I guess you can say, sustainability when it comes to that, and trends that you can actually see consistently when it comes to that. And so what tends to happen is people will overly trust these tools and they'll be paying an arm and a leg for this, when the reality is they don't really need the tools in the first place. John and I found this out, I want to say probably about 2.5 years ago. And it was an area where we decided, well, it's nice to have these tools. We can see somewhat what's going on, but it doesn't really give us that much insight and actually causes more harm than good, because it confuses people, right? Because you might, like I said, see shifts that happen that are not necessarily correlated to the actual channel. They're correlated to another channel, but you don't see that. It leads you away from that kind of thing. So an example of that would be, you know, if I scale up Meta spend goes up, my Google results inside of, let's say, Triple Whale start to perform better. But I didn't increase spend on Google, but all of a sudden they're performing better, and it's going to attribute it. So then people think, oh, Google's doing better now. Now I can scale up Google and not scale up Meta. But they don't look and see, hey, I scaled up Meta and it caused Google to do better. And so they move into the scenario of, you know, singular channel, sort of siloed based still. And so I'm not saying these tools are necessarily bad, they're just very misleading, and I don't necessarily get any use out of them. Like, the only thing that I would say would be beneficial that I get to see is like the cost per different platform, and then the top line metrics, which is like your MER, NCAC, general AOV, general CAC, AMER or NMER, so how many people are coming to your website and purchasing compared to the overall ad spend. So think of it as sort of like your global ROAS is what MER is, or NMER is like your new customer global ROAS. And so what I tend to see, like I said, be the main issue there is that they don't really use it for that purpose. People don't really look at it that way. And it's really just an overpriced way to look at ads when you don't really need it in the first place. Wicked Reports, I would say, is above these just because it uses edge-based tracking. So the click data is a lot cleaner and wicked than all these other platforms. These are the platforms use fingerprinting only, as far as I know, and they are not using edge-based tracking, which Wicked Reports is, and it doesn't layer on an algorithm. You can actually turn it on and off based on how you want to look at the data. So it just gives you the raw data per se. But even then, the biggest thing that I see with this is there's not necessarily a huge benefit based on the cost. And so I have kind of moved to this next area over here, and we'll get to CAPI imports in just a minute. This next area over here, which is P&L tracking, right? So this could be in typically, and this is literally what all these large companies use, is literally a spreadsheet. I'm not even joking you, a Google spreadsheet, and we look at top line metrics and we look at spend correlations, right? So we're looking at literally what's Google spend, what's Facebook spend. We're already aware of all the tactics on how to move the platform cold or warm, so we're not even worried about that. And we're looking at correlations to the top line metrics. Kind of like what I was saying over here, as this is kind of like a live dashboard of your top line metrics. A P&L is the exact same thing because you don't need to have any attribution for top line metrics. You're not supposed to have attribution for top line metrics. You're looking at the total cost of ads and the total revenue coming in to get your total MER efficiency, your media efficiency ratio, your global ROAS, right? So you don't need any third-party tool to do that. You can literally just hand calculate that weekly, monthly, quarterly, however you want to do it. I would recommend doing it at least weekly, but that's, the general thing. Now, obviously, NCAC, same exact scenario where you're calculating the total new customers or the total spend, of all your marketing, everything across the board, including Amazon, divided by your total new customers. So we're talking Amazon, any other platform, like we're putting it all together into one. And so this is good because, like I said, it's free, but there's also these other tools you can use as well, like Store Hero or Lifetimely, that will give you sort of the, I guess you can say, automated updates in terms of what your P&L sheet is going to look like, so you don't have to go in and manually update it. I would say that if you're using any of these tools for those top line measurements, I would strongly recommend using these tools instead if you want something that's just automatic and easy and ready to use. I don't have any affiliate links in the description for this. These are just tools that I've used and I see work. And so this is just, giving you guys all the information because this is very important. You'll save a lot of money by not going after these third-party tools over here and a lot of confusion. And you don't even need to run these tools if you don't want to. You can just do, like I said, a spreadsheet. Super easy. I do that for pretty much all my businesses. Okay, so then where we're at now is in this scenario over here. And I got one more after this, but CAPI to influence the P&L, right? So we're looking at P&Ls and we're saying, okay, what can we do if we've got all the cold tactics, we've got everything set up properly, we know based on past history, and we're not able to get out of the rut of warm traffic being overly attributed or overly rewarded in the platform, which therefore does not allow us to scale new customers as efficiently as we want to. So then we say, okay, we've tried this, we've tried exclusions, we've tried traffic feeder campaigns, we've tried pushing manually in a direction towards certain keywords, we've tried taking out performance max and only going after standard shopping, and that can work, but to a certain point you have so much return customers and so much overlap that the efficiency starts to get larger and larger and larger because your audience pools pulling from one channel to the other are also growing. And so the way that we get around this and the way that we help fight against that issue of warm traffic starting to take over and your two platforms starting to cannibalize each other is we lean into what we call CAPI imports now. If there's a very specific term, or I guess a specific way that we use CAPI imports, and that is edge-based CAPI imports. So we're not talking Elevar, we're not talking any other third-party tool other than what I know of, and there might be more, but Audience OS or Blotout. And these are the two tools that you use them independently, so you kind of pick one or the other, and they will get you set up with the CAPI imports, which what we do in order to grow a business that way is we have the conversion action optimized towards first click, new customer, and only on that channel, right? So if it's someone that clicks on a Google ad, we want the first click to occur on Google ad, and it has to be a new customer for us to reward the platform. And we do that for each individual platform so we can better influence it to go colder after new customers in the first place. Now, remember, this is in line with still using the cold tactics. So we're not changing our strategy, we're just adding this onto the strategy to make it stakeholder to impact the P&L in a better way, right? So this is sort of the stage that we're kind of moving in right now, that we're not past, but we're kind of adding them together. So if I zoom out a little bit, we went from ROAS in platform metrics 5 years ago to third-party MMMs, which is probably 4 years ago, and then P&L tracking that we've been doing for at least 3 years now, and CAPI imports, which we're now doing within, let's say, the last year. So now we're in a scenario where we're moving to this other area, and this is going to be something that I'm going to be talking a lot more on the channel about, which is, drumroll, creative. So when it comes to pushing and pulling, creative and messaging is at the heart of all marketing, and it's something that you can't really get away from. You kind of go through this whole development process of, oh, I can trust the data, to no, I can't, to, oh my God, okay, let's understand what's going on to the actual business because that matters, to, okay, let's get more advanced with our data stream, to now let's figure out what people actually want to buy in the first place, right? So we have a whole structure in our Skool community about how we lay this out. To kind of give you guys a summary, because we're updating this, honestly, it feels like monthly or bi-weekly at this point, because there's just so much more information coming out about Andromeda. But when it comes to creative, this goes beyond just Facebook, right? So we're talking about the general concept, meaning the overall idea that we're trying to get, like the value prop, and then the hook, and then the offer on top of that. We're trying to figure those out first, meaning that's going to be on the website, that's going to be in the ad copy, that's going to be on the creative on Facebook. And then once we figure out what works in the marketplace, then we move to understanding different variations of that creative. So different pillars is what we like to call them. So like UGC, founders video, all that kind of stuff. And so what this really does though, is it gets to the heart of the issue of the business, which is your actual offering and what you're giving consumers, how you're winning them over to your business, because we've already kind of hit the wall on efficiency from a traffic perspective, and we're finding out that as we scale these accounts more and more, it's way easier to change the overall offering and creative versus going through our entire understanding of media mixes. Now, this is obviously very, very important, and we're talking this is how you turn like a 7-figure to an 8-figure to a 9-figure company, but the issue is that some of these smaller 7-figure brands do not have the right creative and right offer built out. And so this is kind of what we're going to be exploring a little bit more in some future videos on how we want to structure this, what kind of ads we want to look at, how we want to test offers, and giving you guys some more insight as to how we're doing that in the first place. We'll also be covering this on the other YouTube channel, CProGrowth, but this is something that, like I said, is going to take us back to our roots and sort of bring us, kind of marrying the two of traffic with actual offer, because traffic is only going to do so much, right? Like I can have the best, awesome, perfect strategy when it comes to overall structure of a campaign, but if there's a core issue in the business, like if I have business A and we're selling a product that's almost the same, if not the exact same as business B, but business B is cheaper, people are going to probably go to business B unless there's some other kind of offer or value prop that you have that they don't have. And a lot of the drop shippers in the space are focused heavily on creative, which I think is great because it's a very, very, very hard thing to figure out when you are a reseller or a drop shipper, because you don't necessarily have the capabilities to differentiate yourself as much unless you get into some tactics that kind of, make you appear more like a brand. And so this is going to be an area, like I said, I'll be exploring more because this can be applied to any business. Anyone can think about this. Anyone can take the concepts, and we're going to get more into psychology as well. Because traffic at this point, like I said, is changing constantly. And I know that when we have, for example, two scenarios of creative as a lever and traffic as a lever, creative tends to be the larger problem. Traffic tends to be the easier problem if you're at the point of understanding correlations to a P&L versus all these other things. So with that being said, thank you again for watching this video. We're sticking to where, the whole point of me starting this channel was to go around, for example, traffic and digital marketing and leaning into the original psychology and what kind of brought us all here in the first place. So anyways, thanks again, and I will see you guys in the next video.